So my name is Ratnaprabha, and I'm one of the people that teaches here at the North London Buddhist Centre. And being a Buddhist centre, it would be useful to know what a Buddhist actually is. And so that is my question for the start of this: what is a Buddhist? And it's actually a very easy question to answer completely traditionally, which is it's someone who's gone for refuge, or who goes for refuge. Goes for refuge to enlightenment, the path, and the community. And in Buddhist centres, in Buddhist temples all over the world, you'll come across people saying out loud that they go for refuge in words which go back 2,500 years, which gives me a little bit of a frisson, actually, that sense. They're saying the same things that people have said for 2,500 years, exactly the same words. And so I'll just show you what it is. So you'd bow to the shrine and you'd recite the refuges, which include Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. So that means, to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. And you'll often hear it recited in that language. Sometimes people will do it in their local language. But although this is very clear and plain in the Buddhist tradition, it's also a little bit weird, that idea of going for refuge. What does that mean? Why do they use that term? And it is an accurate translation of the Pali language. Okay, so a little image or a story to give you an idea as to what's going on here. So imagine that you have gone on a nature watching holiday in a hot and humid country, and you're out there in the jungle, yeah? And there's monkeys in the trees and birds in the trees, birds of paradise maybe, the strange cries. You look down and there's butterflies flying, there's these really amazing little beetles scuttling around, and then some other thing that, oh, what is that down on the ground? Something fascinating. And you get closer with your camera, and it is a big centipede, And you get closer till, and then what you don't realise about centipedes, especially if you mistake them for millipedes, is that centipedes are fast. They are predators. They don't just sort of crawl around like a worm. So this one comes for you quickly. It bites you on the foot and you think, oh no, I wish I hadn't worn flip-flops for this visit. But you think, oh well, I've been bitten by wasps. It's probably nothing serious, isn't it? But after a while, your ankle starts to swell up. You can feel the toxin in your system. You can feel it's affecting your perceptions as well. You realise this is serious. So you have to find yourself a doctor. And when you do find a doctor, they look at the photo you took of the creature, and they diagnose the toxin that's there. They give you the antidote to take, and they put you in a bed in hospital, surrounded by people looking after you, where you can gradually recover. So this little story is the way that people in Buddhism traditionally look at refuge. They say, we've got a sickness, we've got a problem. If you've got a problem, what do you need? You need a doctor, you need a medicine, you need some care. And these are the three jewels of Buddhism you go for refuge to. The doctor being the Buddha, or the possibility of Buddhahood, the medicine being the Dharma, the path, the practices of Buddhahood, and the nurses sort of thing being the Sangha, the people who are supporting you. So that's fair enough so far, but are we actually sick? It's all very well saying this, but do we actually need a doctor and a nurse and medicine, all that kind of thing? I mean by that, are we in actual trouble? Maybe we haven't been bitten by centipedes. It's not that kind of sickness we're talking about. It's metaphorical sickness. Is there something seriously wrong with our way of living, so that we need a metaphorical doctor and a metaphorical medicine and metaphorical nurses? Now, the easiest way to answer that, to escape the question in a way, is to say, well, if you think that everything is fine, then you probably don't need Buddhism. Buddhism isn't one of those religions that says that everybody ought to be a Buddhist. Buddhism is for people that don't think things are fine. People who think there's something wrong both with the world and with their lives and their experience. But there's a longer answer than that easy answer, which is rather dismissive, which is to go into the whole issue of suffering. The Buddhist word for suffering is dukkha. And the reality of human suffering is the first noble truth in Buddhism. So if you know anything about Buddhism, you've probably heard of the Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha says, this is the way he puts it in the early scriptures of Buddhism. He says, birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Being stuck with what you don't like is suffering. Separation from what you do like is suffering. Not getting what you want is suffering. In brief, whatever is subject to clinging is suffering. So that's the way he summarizes it, and it's in the very first turning of the wheel of Dharma, as they call it, at least according to the records, the first teaching that he gave. So, okay, grit your teeth, let's really face it. Do babies suffer? They do. Can you remember when you were very small, some of the anguish, the fear, the loneliness, the neediness that you experienced as a young child? I mean, I can remember my parents split up when I was only 4. And I can remember before that, when I was 3 or 4 years old, sitting at the top of the stairs, kitchen downstairs, listening to them rowing, late at night. And it's like, for a little 3, 4-year-old child, that is terrifying somehow. It's real anguish, isn't it? But then maybe being a teenager for me was actually a bit worse than that, the toughest time. Now, I do quite a lot of school visits with teenagers, and I hope that you don't just find teenagers annoying. I know they are annoying, but I hope it's not. I hope you feel a bit of sympathy and a bit of memory, what it's like. Maybe it wasn't bad for you, but what it's like to go through teenage years. It is really tough. And then, of course, as we watch the news, we realise just how many people are subject to hunger and poverty, to violence, to prejudice, to persecution. And maybe, our own personal suffering seems relatively mild in comparison. But the Buddha does want us to face up to the fact that things are not right, just to face that fact. Maybe you don't agree with it, but I think we can give some evidence for it. But maybe even there I'm sidestepping the important suffering, which is now. What about now? What is life like for you now? Do you sometimes feel empty or down in the dumps? Or do you find yourself sometimes going for your favourite intoxicants to numb the pain? What is the point of all this struggle to get to work? I was talking to Lorraine earlier about what the strike was like, what the tube strike was like, and in her place of work, she was saying that all these people had 2-hour journeys, they were so stressed, and then when they got in, the coffee machine wasn't working, and they were angry with the train drivers, So we've got to do this, struggle, get to work, earn some money, go back to the flat afterwards, feed the cat, do the washing up, empty the litter tray. So the suggestion is that we need a refuge from suffering. That's the suggestion, that we need a refuge from suffering. Now, Sangharakshita, who is the founder of the Triratna Community, sees going for refuge as this: breaking away from entanglements and complicated murkiness, because our current state is restrictive, cramped, limiting, confined, unsatisfactory, even dangerous, as though we were imprisoned, even caged on a treadmill. And naturally, we have the urge to get out, to break out if necessary, to get free, to get clear. So, maybe this is exaggerated, but you can make your own mind up about that. So refuge from suffering. Now, fortunately, the description by the Buddha about suffering that I read out earlier does give a clue as to the way out of all this mess. Because we're not just saying, oh, everything's suffering, you've got to put up with it and be miserable. It's no, there is a way out, which is the other noble truths. And the clue is actually the second noble truth, which he referred to when he said that whatever is subject to clinging is suffering. So there's something about the way we respond to our experience that seems to turn it bad. He who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy. You may have heard that quote by William Blake. He who binds himself to a joy does the winged life destroy. Yet he who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise. So all the wonderful things in life, those birds of paradise in the jungle and the butterflies, for example, they can just be pure joys if we don't hang on to them, if we don't want to possess them in our little cameras, and if we don't spoil the experience through having loads of expectations. It should be like this, or I'm not going to be satisfied. But it is so hard, though, just to turn all those habitual reactions off. And it's hard not to blame other people and to blame external circumstances for our suffering. It's natural to do that. And no doubt there are improvements that can be made. And it seems to me a lot of the project is to try to make the world into a better place for people, isn't it? That's what we do need to do. But that is going to take a very long time. And it's not going to mean that tomorrow we wake up and nothing is going wrong. Things do go wrong. And what is worse, there's something even worse than this, which is it could get worse. It's bad enough already, but it could get worse. And this is the incentive for seeking refuge. It's a refuge from suffering, but it's particularly from the suffering that we create ourselves, and the suffering, therefore, that we can do something about. Refuge is not a hiding place, but it's an approach to life that tackles the suffering that we create for ourselves and that we create for other people as well. So it's just good to look at that things could get worse. And maybe you have experienced that downward spiral at some point in your life when things really did get worse, maybe through addictive behavior or through habitual poor communication. That's often the reason where things just seem to cycle downwards, or being assailed by needs and demands that we don't feel that we can cope with, or whatever your own favourite downward spiral is. Well, that could happen again if you've experienced it before. If you've never experienced it, it could happen in the future. So the refuge is about seeking safety from the danger into getting into a downward spiral, and safety from our present difficulties as well, through using Buddhist practice. So the first of the Noble Truths recognises suffering, and the second sees that the cause of suffering is clinging. And then we've got truths number 3 and 4, and they represent the refuges. The third truth is the truth of freedom from suffering. In other words, the truth of awakening, of Buddhahood. The possibility of ending the self-created suffering by becoming like the Buddha. And the fourth truth is the truth of the path, the Dharma, which is a path that we find among the Sangha. So the third refuge is there as well, the community. Okay, so I hope you're getting a picture of this idea of refuge in Buddhism. But the other thing to recognize is that we go for refuge anyway. We go for refuge anyway. And when life is painful, we do want a refuge, and we do all sorts of things to try to deal with the pain. And the suggestion from Buddhism is that it's only by working on your mind along the path to enlightenment that you find a genuine refuge. But the things we tend to go to are not, well, they are false refuges, probably. At least they may work in a little bit. They may ameliorate things a little bit, but we mustn't think that they're going to solve all the problems. There are ways in which maybe we temporarily numb the pain, or we distract ourselves from the pain, or we pretend that the pain is not there, or, well, if I'm honest, my favourite way is slipping into false refuges through overstimulating myself with ideas, with videos, with all my preoccupations, all that kind of thing, just filling things up. And almost as if the noise is in the quiet. I can hear the discomfort of life, and the noise seems to drown it out. Except it doesn't, because the tension is still there. Instead of that, I need to sit with the uncomfortable experience, bringing mindfulness to it and bringing metta, loving kindness, to it. In the Buddha's day, he thought of these false refuges, particularly of people thinking that God could help them, or that local nature spirits could help them, or something like that, and people would go and do all these superstitious things. So this is what he said. Many people, out of fear, flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees and shrines, to sacred places. Maybe online they can put it up, this quote, Jenny might be able to put it up. Fleeing to such a refuge, one is not released from all suffering. One who goes for refuge to the enlightened one, to the truth and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the Four Noble Truths, for him this is a safe refuge. This is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from all suffering. So that's almost like the canonical little explanation of true and false refuges. So this is what Buddhism is designed to do. The Buddha said, I teach one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. There's like two things, but he said it was one thing, which is interesting, didn't he? I teach one thing, suffering and the end of suffering. And Buddhism is designed to put an end to the unsatisfactoriness of life. And this word refuge is highlighting what we're avoiding, what we're trying to get away from, the suffering there. But most of us don't want to walk backwards up the spiritual ramp, sort of thing. If you're working forwards rather than backwards, what is it that you're looking to, that you're moving towards? And these are known as the three refuges, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. It's not all about suffering, it's also about inspiration, it's about learning, it's about joyful states of mind, it's about love and compassion and so on. So that's the attractive that you're moving towards and is growing stronger and stronger. So inspiration comes from the three refuges, which are the three most precious things in Buddhism. The Tibetans call them the goal, the path, the support. They're always very concise. Well, actually, they're not always very concise, but sometimes they're very concise, the Tibetans. The goal, the path, the support. The Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the Buddha is the enlightened teacher and founder of Buddhism, and seen as a true refuge for three reasons, because he himself was said to be liberated from all dangers, from all suffering. He was supremely skillful at helping others to liberate themselves, and also he had unbiased compassion. But more crucially, the Buddha represents the goal. In other words, one's own potential, not just the person that taught Buddhism originally. And the Dharma means the teachings of Buddhism, and more importantly, actually practicing those teachings to tread the path, and then realizing the different stages of the path. And the Sangha is the support. Now, this is an interesting one, the Sangha. It's a bit ambivalent, because we use the word Sangha to mean everyone we meet here at the Buddhist Centre, particularly those who are more committed and more involved. But are they reliable? I'm not reliable. Don't rely on me, whatever you do. So the Sangha is a little bit different in that way. The reliable Sangha means those who are realized, who really have deep wisdom. And that's why on the shrine, I've actually put an image here of Dada Rinpoche, a great Tibetan teacher, who I don't have any doubt that he was a member of the Noble Sangha, those who have deep realization. And I've also put, for the Dharma refuge, I put a couple of Buddhist sutras down there, one from Mahayana, one from the Hinayana, which I already mentioned, the Dharma part of the red one, and then the other one is Perfection of Wisdom, which I'll mention towards the end. So don't rely on the Sangha in its widest sense, but it means teachers who have some degree of realization, even if we can only meet them through books or recordings. But to some extent, I think we can look to each other for support, encouragement, for learning, even for inspiration, as long as we don't get too disillusioned when it turns out that we have feet of clay, as they say. Now, in our current series of talks, We're looking at the special things that we emphasize in this particular branch of Buddhism, Triratna Buddhism, the Triratna community. But I said that going for refuge was something that was common to all the Buddhist schools. So why is it mentioned in the list of the special emphases in Triratna? Well, the thing is that refuge tends to be rather taken for granted in many forms of Buddhism. You recite the refuges at the temple because you're already a Buddhist. Of course you're going for refuge because you're a Buddhist. But there are then a lot more exciting things to come up ahead. Deep samadhi meditations, wonderful non-dual insights to achieve and so on. So refuge can get forgotten or regarded as being something very basic and elementary. Sangharakshita writes, though going for refuge is found in all forms of Buddhism, it rarely, if ever, has a special place in them. That place is taken more often than not by something else, either by monastic ordination, for example, or by a particular kind of meditation or some other spiritual practice. In our own tradition, however, going for refuge is central. We seek to place the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, at the centre, at the heart of our lives, and to orient all our activities towards them, directly or at least indirectly. So when Sangharakshita founded Triratna back in 1967, he felt that going for refuge was, well, first of all, it was a genuinely strong and life-changing experience. It wasn't just some words to recite. And secondly, he said that going for refuge is something that keeps unfolding throughout your life. It's not a one and for all experience. It gets deeper and deeper, moving from level to level until enlightenment. And enlightenment itself is the ultimate refuge, a Buddha going for refuge to a Buddha. So deepening, how does it deepen? So levels of going for refuge can be a good way of understanding how it deepens. So let's have a look at those levels. Now, first of all, is the cultural or ethnic level, where you do, as I was saying, at the temple, you chant the refuges because you're a Buddhist. It's part of your local Buddhist culture. But even if you're not part of a Buddhist culture, you can find yourself at this basic cultural level. Maybe for us, the equivalent is a generally positive response to Buddhism and meditation, maybe getting a nice Buddha statue from the garden centre to stick in your garden or mantelpiece, or putting a quote from a Buddha on a poster on the wall, or even just coming here to a Buddhist centre, but maybe mainly for social reasons, which is fine, you know, come along because you meet interesting people. But then there's another level above that, and that is what's called the provisional level of going for refuge, which is where you have a genuine personal response to the Dharma, where you really want to try it out, and you want to do so within a particular Sangha, a particular spiritual community, and you want to live according to the Buddhist precepts, you want to make meditation a part of your life, you want to be open to seeing things in new ways that go beyond self-clinging. And if you feel that you do have a response like that to Buddhism, then what you can do, if you want to, is to formalize that by becoming a mitra. Mitra is, we've got some mitras here. Mitra is somebody who's decided, yeah, I'm a Buddhist and I want to practice in this particular community. Can't remember, I don't know if we've got any mitra ceremonies coming up, but there's a festival coming up. I don't know if it was, usually we have mitra ceremonies at the festival, so if you want to see one, come along on Sunday week to Padmasambhava Day. And the next level is effective going for refuge, when the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha are genuinely, completely central to your life. They become the most important things, they become your highest priorities. And all your decisions are made in the light of the three refuges. Getting ordained is a recognition by others that your refuge is deep and lasting in that kind of way. So that's the effective level of going for refuge. And then we have the most important level of going for refuge, which is called the real going for refuge, or in the tradition it's actually called the supramundane or the transcendental level of going for refuge. And this is when you've entered the stream, to use the traditional term. You now have such a deep sense of reality that it's always available to you as a touchstone. That insight is really deep. And though you have a long way to go to enlightenment, You're still regarded as a trainee in the tradition, but you're definitely never going to turn back. You're never going to fall away from it. That's stream entry. And that real go for refuge is a realistic, very difficult, but realistic goal for anybody to undertake. And it seems a little bit more accessible as an idea, and understandable even, than enlightenment itself, full enlightenment. Now, I won't go into detail. We can say a little bit about that, but stream entry is basically equivalent to the arising of the Bodhi heart, as it's called in Mahayana Buddhism, and also equivalent to what's known as the opening of the Dharma eye, the eye of transcendental vision or of wisdom. And then finally, the top level of going for refuge is the ultimate level, or the absolute level. In a Buddha or an awakened being whose consciousness is nothing but the Dharma, and the Dharma is fully embodied in that being. So that's the ultimate level of going for refuge. Now, Sangharakshita also suggests a fifth type of going for refuge, which is not really a level, but it's rather mind-blowing, this one. So hold your horses, fasten your seatbelts. This is cosmic going for refuge. So I find this really interesting because this is the sense that there is a way in which all life is stretching for Buddhahood. That the very fact of a certain degree of sentience or awareness means that there is a possibility of transcendence, of going beyond that particular level. It's not necessarily, but gradually the evolutionary process seems to throw up on the beach, different levels of consciousness until finally we get to self-awareness itself, gradually reducing the limitations on awareness, driving the whole evolutionary process, trying, as it were, to produce self-aware beings like us, and then trying to turn those self-aware beings into enlightened beings. So that's quite magical, isn't it? That's sort of bringing the whole cosmos into it. Okay, so are you a Buddhist? Now we know what a Buddhist is, someone who goes for refuge. And have you ever been asked that question? If you've been interested in Buddhism or come to a Buddhist centre, what would you answer if somebody said, are you a Buddhist? Maybe it's a matter of identity. Maybe it's just, I practice Buddhism. I do things like meditate, study Buddhism. I meet up with people at a Buddhist centre. Or maybe it's holding certain beliefs, perhaps. Actions do have consequences. And you can work to change your mental habits. Everything is impermanent. The Buddha was enlightened and showed the way to enlightenment. Those are some of the beliefs that might be there. But I think there's also, I don't know if you have this, but a reluctance to be labelled. I think this is particularly true for Buddhists because Buddhists tend to be very free-spirited people who think for themselves in general. They haven't joined a conformist type religion. So you don't want to be, I don't want to be called a Buddhist. It's a label, it's really restricting. And so a lot of people come here, they do all the things I mentioned, maybe they believe some of those things, but maybe they wouldn't be happy with being called a Buddhist. And even some members of the order, the Triratna order, don't like the label Buddhist. And you can't get more Buddhist than them, really, can you? And I mentioned that I do quite a few school visits. And the class comes along to the Buddhist centre, as they would to go and visit a mosque or a cathedral. Oh, now we're going to a Buddhist centre, how exciting. And so they go to the Buddhist centre. And one thing that always surprises them is when I say the majority of the people who come to this Buddhist centre are not Buddhists. So if you're not Buddhist, you are in the majority. And personally, I think that's a really good thing. It's not a special reserved place for fully avowed Buddhist devotees to come and do their rituals and all that kind of thing. And we can do that. Yeah, there's plenty of space to do that, but it's not just for that. It's a place for everybody who wants to try out Buddhist practices and to do them together with other people, whatever they call themselves. So I mentioned that you might not feel you're a Buddhist, but on the other hand, a lot of people do have a very strong response when they encounter Buddhism, as if they know it already, as if they rediscovered something very precious. And there's a quotation, they feel that after many wanderings, they have come home. For some, Buddhism represents what they have in fact always believed, although without fully realizing it. And I certainly had that sense. I thought, yeah, it just sensible, just makes sense, which is very reassuring, after being exposed to other religious traditions that, to me at least, didn't really make sense. So after a while, it might be that you feel very enthusiastic about your Buddhist practice and your Buddhist friends. You're excited about what you've found. It's having maybe a valuable effect on you, and maybe you're even keen to tell everybody how great meditation is, how much sense Buddhism makes. And maybe then you say, oh yeah, I'm definitely a Buddhist. And maybe then you become a mitra or you consider ordination. But then after a while, you start to think, you have these doubts. You think, well, can I really claim to be a genuine follower of the Buddha and a member of the Sangha when I'm so imperfect in so many ways? And I've got involved in this Buddhist movement, which is really imperfect in many ways. And do I really want to express a full allegiance to that when there's so many flaws here, when it contains people who've been unskillful, who've not lived up to the values of Buddhism? Anyway, it's up to you. I don't feel anyone making use of Buddhist practices needs to call themselves Buddhist, but also you don't need to be embarrassed about using that term if you want to. But shall we agree that it's after you've made a commitment, going for refuge, that's when you're a Buddhist, that's the definition. If you have no objection to using that word, commitment, going for refuge, that's the thing. Now, when Sangharakshita founded the Triratna community and the order, he wanted to make sure that going for refuge was clearly the defining step. More important than whether or not you become a monk or a nun, or whether you accept certain doctrines or recite certain words, or whether you move into a monastery or a temple. What matters is whether you are going for refuge. The way you choose to live your life is very important, but it's secondary to that basic commitment. Okay, so I'm going to start summing up. Sometimes we feel nervous, we feel anxious, we feel insecure. Life is genuinely dangerous in a number of ways, not just physically dangerous, but mentally dangerous. So we seek safety and security, but where do we seek it? We choose certain refuges, but do they work? What are their shortcomings? Maybe some of the commonest ones would be refuge in Korea. But what happens when you retire? What happens if you get the sack, But your career can absorb a lot of your energy. That is where it's all going, which is maybe fine for a while, but maybe it's not the best refuge for the whole of your life. More controversially, even the family. Sometimes that is where our refuge is. I want to make sure I bring up my children properly. I have a good relationship. We have security. We have a house. We pay off the mortgage, all that kind of thing. All very good things to do. But if that's your ultimate refuge, what happens if the marriage breaks up? What happens when the children leave home? And all that kind of thing. Or it could be that your refuge is in ideas, in ideology, you could say. Yeah, that's what I believe in this. And that can be great as well, but it's maybe something on the intellectual level. So we choose certain refuges, but we need to look at their shortcomings. And Buddhism says the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, are the true refuges. And when the Buddha was about to die, he was concerned that without him around any longer to refer to, people might just give up. And so this is what he said to his followers. He said, be islands unto yourselves. Be refuges unto yourselves with no other refuge. And let the Dharma be your island. Let the Dharma be your refuge with no other refuge. And then he goes on to say, how do you do that? How do you make the Dharma your refuge? By practicing all the forms of mindfulness. And that's how you can be an island. And that's how you can use the Dharma as an island. And this image of the island is an image he'd used before. He lived on the Ganges plain. Floods were really a big deal. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you the story of Patichara, she was very seriously affected by the floods. Great downpours of rain there used to be. And, well, we've had great downpours of rain here, haven't we? And maybe you've been affected by floods. Everything washed away, which means you need to find some safe ground, and that is called the island in the flood. So the Buddha wanted to encourage real self-reliance, looking for this island of the refuge. And he said, the Buddhas only show the way. By you must the zealous effort be made. So refuge doesn't mean giving up your responsibility for yourself and your life, or using pure faith or obedience to some dead saintly figure for your salvation. You make yourself a safe island through your practice, a refuge, and you use the Dharma, the truth, the teachings as a safe refuge. But I want to finish on something that's a little bit disconcerting. And this is from a great Tibetan Buddhist teacher of the 20th century, very flawed, called Chogyam Trungpa. And what he said was, approaching enlightenment is like falling out of an aeroplane. The bad news is you've fallen out of an aeroplane. There's nothing to hang on to. You haven't got a parachute. The good news is there's no ground. So the aeroplane is the false refuges. They're impermanent, they're unreliable. When they fail, we feel betrayed and angry. But what's being pointed out here, in a way, it's very deep. It's like that the sense of self cannot safeguard itself because there's nothing there to be secured. And this self, this small mind, can never itself find a satisfactory refuge. And in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, it says this: one does not stand in form perception, one does not stand in feeling, in will, or in consciousness. In the Dharma's true nature alone one is standing. Then that is one practice of wisdom, the highest perfection. Change and no change, suffering and ease, the self and the not self, the lovely, the repulsive, just one suchness in this emptiness they are. And so one takes not one's stand on the fruit which has been won. The Buddha himself was not stationed in the unconditioned realm of nirvana, but nor was he stationed in this conditioned realm, but freely he wandered without a home. Just so, without the support of a base, a bodhisattva is standing. And a bodhisattva means an ideal Buddhist. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. There's a bit of chance for questions. But first of all, I just want to do my refuges. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this in front of the shrine. Now, if you want to join in, you're welcome. But you don't feel you have to. So I'm going to do the refuges, just the refuges in front of the shrine. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Then you can say it after me if you want to. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. And then when we finish, if you want to light a candle or offer a little glass bead, you can do that, if you wish. Because although the refuges are inner things, it's quite nice that they're sort of represented in temples and Buddhist centres by the Buddha, and by sometimes the Dharma books, and by the great teachers of the past,